Hi, everyone. Welcome to a pretty different episode of Climate Swings. Today's episode isn't what I had originally planned. If you've been following along, you know that I'm approaching the 6-month anniversary, a milestone I was really excited to celebrate with a special episode highlighting some of the most impactful conversations and insights from climate professionals around the world. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Last week, my father, Mark Gold, passed away at his home in Berkeley, California. While I considered postponing this episode altogether, I realized that perhaps the most authentic thing I could do is what we've been doing all along on Climate Swings, sharing human stories. Today, that story happens to be my own. At its heart, Climate Swings has always been about the human dimension of climate work, the personal journeys, challenges, and moments of clarity that drive people into this field. We've heard from scientists, entrepreneurs, activists about what motivates them to persevere in the difficult work that often feels like pushing against unsurmountable obstacles. In many ways, my father's story contains parallels to these themes of mission and purpose. Born in Montreal in 1950 to Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors, he was brilliant and adventurous, traits that took him from law school in Quebec to studying in Paris, and eventually to California after meeting my mother during a vacation in Mexico in 1980. My father was always adaptable. He passed the California bar exam on his first attempt, despite having only studied civil law in Quebec. That ability to face challenges head on really served him well throughout his life, but he was tested severely, especially in his final years. After surgery in 2020, he developed blood clots and needed to go on blood thinners that restricted what day-to-day activities he once loved. Then came an Alzheimer's diagnosis, and we watched as his once vibrant mind gradually lost its spark and seemingly his interest in life itself. As the years slowly passed, he grew increasingly distant and detached, doing crossword puzzles, playing backgammon, which he was an expert at until the end, and of course, as a Canadian watching hockey, seemed to be the only things that kept him going. Many of my climate guests have spoken about the emotional toll of their work, the grief that comes from watching systems break down, the frustration of setbacks, and having to strike a balance between acknowledging hard truths and maintaining hope. Well, these past years with my father also taught me similar lessons about holding space for difficult and sometimes conflicting realities. While death is always a tragedy or has elements of tragedy, in my father's case, it was also a relief, both for him and my mother, who had increasingly needed to care for his everyday needs. This complex set of emotions, blessing mixed with loss, especially since he left us peacefully and in no pain, resembles what many climate workers describe when talking about adaptation and resilience in the face of unavoidable change and huge challenges. Now, about Mark, what I'll remember most about my father was his adventurous spirit. We would take long bike rides during my childhood through Palo Alto, where I grew up. We explored Asia together, where I lived for over a decade, from Beijing to Bangkok. And we spent countless hours griping about politics and current affairs, finding common ground in our shared values. Bringing this back to climate swings, the core mission of my podcast has always been to humanize the sometimes abstract work of addressing climate change. And I think that feels really relevant now. My father's story reminds me why personal narratives really do matter. They connect us to larger issues, they help to process complexity, and they ultimately inspire action, not through distant statistics or apocalyptic warnings, but through genuine human connection. So today, instead of celebrating 6 months of climate swings with industry insights or technical discussions, I am honoring the human story that ultimately shaped my own journey to this work. In future episodes, of course, we'll return to our regularly scheduled programming, continuing to spotlight the remarkable people working on climate solutions. But I hope this personal episodes can serve as a reminder of why I started this podcast in the first place, because behind every climate career is a person with their own story, their own motivation, their own unique path. And I also want to open the door to getting a bit more personal on the show with episodes about my life and my journey, including a couple of exciting swings that I'm looking forward to sharing more about in the coming weeks. So, in general, I want to thank you all for your understanding and support during this time. And really, if there's one thing I'd ask you to take away from today's episode, it's this: Reach out to the people you love, ask them about their stories, and listen deeply. Because ultimately, whether we're talking about climate work or any pursuit that has a bit of meaning to it, it's always the human connections that sustain us. So, as always, thank you for tuning in. I'm Michael Gold, and I will be back next week with Climate Swings, another story from the front lines of climate careers. Take care.